Today is the day that we jump back into our journey through the classes of Honkai Star Rail. It's been a little bit and we just got the official release of the latest member of today's class. We won't be talking about him for a while though because we've got quite a lot to go over. Harmony is just blatantly the strongest class in the game. This is not really up for debate at all as far as I'm concerned. Additionally, the release and usage of popular Harmony units more than any other class defines the types of teams that are meta at any given time. When an overtuned support comes out, the units that benefit most from that overtuned support are going to be meta. This means that the units we'll be looking at today more than the previous classes will give us a clear look at how the meta of the game as a whole is being built at any given point in the game's lifespan. The first meta-defining unit of the class that we'll be looking at is gonna have to wait a minute, because we're gonna start off with Asta. Asta is easily the least important of the three Harmony units that we started the game with, and that isn't really because she's just awful or anything, but because the two units she's competing with are just simply some of the best launch day units in the game, if not the best launch day units in the game. That being said, let's take a look at Asta and see what she tells us about the rest of the class. Asta's skill doesn't actually provide a buff on its own, which is pretty weird for a Harmony unit not to do. However, her talent gives a stacking attack buff that gains stacks based on the amount of enemies Asta hits. This means that the bounce attack that her skill provides is used to generate the attack buff she provides to her allies. Her ult is fairly straightforward as well, which makes sense since she's a launch day 4-star. It simply gives a flat-out speed buff to the party. Her Eidolons don't really change much either, just giving you more ways to consistently keep up the stacks for her skill, giving her a bit more energy recharge and just, making her a bit easier to use. Asta serves as the perfect starting point because of how basic she is as a Harmony unit. She provides broad offensive buffs to your team, letting you act faster and hit harder in the simplest way possible, giving you more attack and more speed. It really doesn't get simpler than that. It's worth pointing out that she was also used early on as someone that could deal a large amount of toughness damage quickly, since in single target, all the bounce hits from her skill would hit one target, but that's not really that relevant considering that, we're more talking about her buffs here. That's really Asta. We've kind of figured her out. She's a fine unit, but unfortunately, she's just overshadowed by a different buffer, even when it comes to the first patch of the game, and even when it comes to fellow 4-stars in the first patch of the game. Tingyun is probably the best 4-star in the game today, just period. She's kind of the Bennett of Star Rail in a way, that she continues to be valuable just in wide varieties of teams despite being a day 1 4-star. The one benefit that Asta has over Tingyun is that Tingyun provides buffs to a single target instead of party-wide. That being said, at this point in the game, we didn't exactly have a massive amount of dual DPS comps that would be considered meta. I mean, the 1.0 units, we had were Jingyuan and Zila. We weren't exactly running them together, Of course, buffing the entire party is nice, but when the rest of the party consists of a sustain, one damage dealer, and a debuffer or second buffer, the fact that Tingyun is a single target buffer becomes a non-issue, especially with how much value she provides. Her skill is a significant attack increase for one ally and also causes that ally to deal additional lightning damage to an enemy when they hit them, or when Tingyun hits them as well, which is neat, I guess. Her ult provides a sizable amount of damage bonus and also provides energy regen for that ally. On top of that, her Eidolons provide an additional speed buff for her ally of choice, even more of a damage spike, and then 2 separate Eidolons that help you regen even more energy for an ally. So in review, Tingyun gives you attack, damage bonus, a whole bunch of energy, and speed. So she buffs you in just about every possible way. Except crit, huh? Wonder when we'll get somebody that buffs crit. That'd be nice. Anyway, as brief of an explanation as that was, I think I've made my point as to just how strong of a unit Tingyun is and how busted her kit is, especially for a day 1 4-star unit. She does so much stuff for you that it's just really a non-contest between her and a unit like Asta as far as buffing a single ally goes. And once again, we didn't really have a lot of reasons to buff multiple allies at the same time when it came to just, what you could consider meta teams if there was such a thing in the first patch of the game. Now let's talk about the standard 5-star. How broken could she really be, right? Right? Bronya is very good. There. Done. We did it. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and okay, yeah, I get it. Let's actually get into it. Bronya's main point of focus is her skill, which is the first example we find in this archetype of 100% action advance. This just means you immediately take a turn, which, if you couldn't tell, is a very good piece of utility. Her skill literally just makes whoever you want take another turn, which is really, really good. You know how buffs increase your damage? Well, what if you just did that damage twice instead? Who wants to do 50% more damage when I could just do 100% more damage by doing damage a second time? Action Advance is something that by itself is incredibly broken as a piece of utility, but Bronya also cleanses an ally when advancing them, along with providing a pretty damn big damage percent buff as well. Her ultimate provides a team-wide attack buff and also grants a crit damage buff, which is a flat buff plus a buff equal to a percent of Bronya's own damage. Building a lot of crit damage can be kind of funny as well because she has a passive that just makes her basic attacks always crit, and while Bronya hypercarry isn't a thing, it's still a cute piece of utility nonetheless. Bronya also brings up the idea of speed tuning, which is something that is annoying, but, is a part of building supports to help specific units. It's basically building a unit to be specifically 1 point above or below another unit in speed. Of course, people often build units to reach particular speed breakpoints as well to allow them to take a certain number of actions per cycle, but with someone like Bronya, it's incredibly convenient to have her move directly after your main damage dealer, so you would speed tune her to be 1 speed lower than your damage dealer of choice. Because then your damage dealer takes a turn, and you know what happens next? Bronya takes a turn, which means your damage dealer takes a turn. Sounds very convenient, doesn't it? Well, it is. Now, her E2 can complicate this a bit by giving a speed buff to the ally after she uses her skill, and that means, the speed tuning becomes a bit of an issue. And look, it's not important. We don't need to talk about that. You guys get the idea at this point, right? Tingyun and Bronya are both very broken units. They give out buffs like candy on Halloween, and they do it very, very well. And while Bronya's ult is team-wide, the overall theme for these two is still very much focused on the vein of supporting a single damage dealer, which is, once again, kind of how things went at the time. Like I alluded to earlier, the first premium 5 stars in the game really didn't lend themselves to being run in a dual DPS comp, especially with the limited variety of units we had available at the moment. The fact that the best buffers also didn't really lend themselves to that setup kind of makes it, a much more solidified part of the meta to just focus on a single damage dealer. Like I said at the top of the video, the direction that Harmony units go is almost always going to be indicative of how the overall meta is meant to go. Now, this trend of Harmony units guiding the meta will become a lot more obvious with the release of some of the later Harmony units that are just, stupidly broken. But before that, we have to introduce the first post-launch addition to the roster, Yukong. Yukong is kind of a weird addition, and while she had some interesting use cases, she was never as universal as her fellow 4-star Fox fellow. That's some alliteration right there, isn't it? Huh. Yukong provides a pretty nifty buff with her skill, and that buff is made even better after using her ultimate. However, her skill only remains active for the next 2 ally turns, meaning that she has a bit of preparation required to maximize the effectiveness of her buff. You want to make sure that the right ally is getting the buff, so you're not just buffing like your sustain and your second buffer instead of buffing your actual damage dealer. The skill buff itself is an attack buff, but after using her ult, it also grants a hefty buff to both crit rate and crit damage. Speaking of her ult, for the time of her release at least, it was also pretty respectable damage. Her Eidolons can help your team move a little faster, give Yukong some more energy, increase her personal damage, and at E6, she even regains a stack of her skill upon using her ult, which makes it easier to spread the buff to the whole party. Like I said, she has some interesting use cases, and she's a unit I even used for a while in the early game. I think she's very fun. I think she has one of the prettiest designs in the game as well, but she's not nearly as universal as units like Bronya or Tingyun. Funnily enough, we still aren't quite at the point where the Harmony class just takes over the whole game with broken premium supports. We actually have to get to yet another new 4-star before we do that. Hanya is interesting because one of her main pieces of utility is related to skill point recovery and skill point generation, as the primary purpose of her skill is to refund skill points. She applies the burden status to an enemy target, and then basically bonking that target twice makes a skill point pop out. Kind of like a piñata, but like skill points instead of candy. I don't think skill points taste as good as candy. I'll ask like QQ or Dan Heng. They eat those things for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so they must taste pretty alright, I guess. Anyway, her talent also makes the enemy affected by burden take increased damage. And also, her first 2 Eidolons involve advancing her own action forward and increasing her speed so she can help even more with skill point generation or reapplying the burden effect. Her ult also increases an ally's speed based on a percentage of her own speed and increasing that ally's attack by around 36%. So while she's far from being some kind of broken premium option, she can help generate skill points, takes actions frequently, and can give your damage dealer some increased attack and speed. We've talked so much about 4-star so far, right? I mean, aside from Bronya, that's really all we've talked about so far is just 4-star units. Aside from talking about how the strongest buffers are focused on targeting a single ally, we also really haven't talked about the meta developing that much, which is weird considering the fact that I have kind of played up the idea that the Harmony class more or less controls the meta. Well, at this point, the fact of the matter is that Bronya and Tingyun kind of are the meta, for starters. I mean, units like Yukong and Hanya have useful abilities and useful utility that can be situationally very good, but overall, most of the relevant units at this early point in the game are running at least one of these 2 broken supports, if not both, in some cases. Does seem like it's getting a bit stale, though. I mean, we haven't even gotten a limited 5-star for the class yet. Hopefully, whoever that first limited Harmony unit is actually able to compete with these units. I mean, they've really got a high bar to clear, and oh, right, it's Ruan Mei, isn't it? And she's like broken, and I mean like really broken. This unit's really broken, man. Before we get into this character, it's worth pointing out that an entire meta-dominant archetype of team that this unit would be the least replaceable part of would eventually form. And yes, by the way, I do think Ruan Mei is the least replaceable break unit, maybe not for like Firefly specifically, because she would really like the super break from Trailblazer, but in general, I do think Ruan Mei is the least replaceable break unit. And I'm pointing this out now because none of the break carries existed at this point. Shout out to Jue Yi, by the way, but no break carries existed, and Ruan Mei was still the best unit in the game on release, and I'm not exaggerating. Her talent is just a conditionless speed boost for all allies that has 100% uptime no matter what, and her talent also deals extra ice damage when an enemy is broken, so like, that's something. And Ruan's skill is a buff that lasts for 3 of her turns that just gives a damage percent buff to all allies as well as increasing their weakness break efficiency. And I know that break teams weren't a thing yet, like I already said, but even in regular setups, more easily breaking the enemy is still objectively a good thing and a damage increase, and like I said, it's just a big damage percent buff as well. Her ult creates a field effect that increases all allies' all-type res pen, which is essentially a damage buff no matter what type of stat you scale off of or what type of damage you're dealing. It's just straight up another way to have a massive damage buff on a character that already has a pretty sizable damage buff on her skill. The field also helps keep enemies' weakness broken as it prevents them from recovering from the weakness broken state and deals ice damage to them instead. Now this effect can only trigger once before the enemy in question is allowed to actually recover from being weakness broken, but like, just kill him beforehand. It's not that hard, especially when you have Ruan Mei. Now, in the future, like I said, Ruan Mei would become well known for break teams as she elevated all the break carries to even greater heights once they all released, but like I said, she was one of the best units, if not the best unit in the game, the day she came out. She was also strictly team-wide buffs. Her damage percent, her res pen, her speed boost, all of it was party-wide, which meant that she could help enable setups that were built around more than one damage dealer, something that units like Ting Yun and Bronya couldn't really accomplish. The fact that her buffs were damage percent and res pen also made her very universal because even if you didn't scale off of attack or other traditional offensive stats, as long as you were dealing damage, you could benefit from her buffs. It was also in the patches around Ruan Mei's release, both before and after, that the roster expanded to the point where we started to see more and more situations where dual damage dealer comps could come about. Of course, in a situation where you wanted to buff multiple damage dealers, Ruan Mei was even more of an upgrade over some of her competition at the time. Ruan Mei was the very first limited 5-star Harmony unit, and she set the bar very high for the rest of the class, and just for kind of everybody. Like I said, she was the best unit in the game when she came out, and that was before break units even existed. Now, you probably know the next unit that we're going to talk about, and you may also know that I have a bit of a soft spot for this one as well. Released in the second half of the 2.0 patch, Sparkle was meant to revitalize the hypercarry archetype of team while providing skill point regen in the process. Her skill only has 50% action advanced as opposed to Bronya's, which is stupid considering that every other Harmony unit in the game that gets to have action advance in their kit, which there are 3 that aren't named Sparkle at this point, all have 100% action advance, but I don't know why Sparkle doesn't get it. Beats me, man! But anyway, yes, from a purely action advance standpoint, Bronya's better because she has 100% action advance, but the actual offensive buffs and skill point generation that Sparkle offers are really, really good. Her talent also increases the skill point cap for your team, which is a very unique piece of utility because it's just kind of neat. And additionally, whenever an ally uses a skill point, her talent triggers a small stacking team-wide damage buff, which is kind of cool. Her skill, aside from the action advance, gives you just a whole lot of crit damage, like, oh boy, it's a whole lot. It's a small flat amount of crit damage plus over a quarter of Sparkle's overall crit damage, meaning that ends up being a very considerable amount of extra crit for your ally of choice. Her ult recovers 4 skill points and increases the damage buff that your talent provides, giving you even more offensive oomph. Admittedly, I do also have this unit at E4. This is the only unit I have at E4. You should never get a unit at E4. You should never spend money on this game, but if you do, just do it on a unit you like. None of my other 5 stars are even close to E4, so I guess I'll kind of mention her Eidolons just because I have them. The first 2 just give you more offensive power, granting defense ignore and a big attack buff, and E4 just gives you even more skill points, which is nice. This isn't really relevant since you really shouldn't pull Eidolons and they shouldn't be considered when judging the viability of a 5-star, but since I had them, once again, thought I'd point them out. Sparkle was a welcome addition to the cast, and while I would say she isn't as universal as Ruan Mei, she's still a very good unit, especially around the time she came out. Especially for skill point hungry damage dealers like Downhung 2, or the funny haha short quantum team that I ran because I was a real gamer, and if you were a real gamer, you were running this team in 2.0. Sparkle would also be very good with Acheron, who would come out as the next big damage dealer, and kind of the first big damage dealer of the 2.x series of patches, because Dot isn't a real archetype, so Black Swan doesn't count. Provided that you had enough units to get enough debuffs on Acheron, you could get her ult quick enough to where Sparkle was kind of worth using as opposed to having another Niobe unit in place of her, because she just gave a big damage buff to Acheron, as of course also just made Acheron move faster, which is, also neat. And getting a massive crit damage bonus on those massive Acheron ult nukes, it led to dealing just a little bit of damage. Just a little bit. Just a smidge of damage. Just a crumb. Just a little bit of damage, I promise. Moving past the Acheron patch, it's where we really start to get to the point where OP Harmony units just define and also kind of divide the meta in the 2.x series of patches. So many great units came out during these patches, and all the while, all of them wanted to use a very small handful of premium supports. It won't be too long after the current patch that we're talking about that we get units like Boot Hill and Firefly coming out, which gives Ruan-Mei an even firmer hold on the meta. We already just mentioned Acheron, and of course, the various versions of the multi-DPS follow-up attack teams are starting to shape up as well. With that being said, oh boy. Let's talk about Robin. The most broken, overtuned support in the game. This is a heavy accusation considering how much I've been talking up Ruan-Mei, but Robin is just... I mean, wow. For starters, her skill is a 25% damage bonus for all allies, which by itself is a pretty nifty amount. Her ult, well, oh boy. Well, her ult gives 100% action advance to the entire team, while also giving an attack buff that can be a pretty massive amount if you build her the right way. Also, whenever allies attack during her ult, she deals additional damage that can stack up to being a pretty decent amount since it's based off her own attack, which is the stat you're building the most on her. She can't take turns during her ult state, but like, why would she even need to anyway? And yeah, she sings. That goes without saying. It's her thing. She isn't a dedicated follow-up attack support by any means, because she's broken with damn near any combination of units. But she has two aspects of her kit that favor follow-up attack setups. Firstly, she has a passive that just, well, straight up buffs follow-up attacks, which, I mean, duh, that would lend itself to, you know, being in follow-up attack teams. Gives them like 25% crit damage, which is a pretty obviously sizable chunk of crit, and she also has a passive that recharges her energy every time an ally attacks, which further synergizes with follow-up attack units that want to quickly attack as often as possible. So let's just take a moment to clean up the timeline here, since I've mostly been talking about kits. In the beginning, we had two popular Harmony units that were set up to mostly support a single damage dealer in Bronya and Ting-Yun. The early meta of the game would revolve around, you guessed it, single damage dealer comps. Dual DPS comps could exist before Ruan-Mei, but having a unit like her absolutely hastened and nurtured their meta development as we headed towards the 2.0 version of the game. Of course, just getting more units as well contributed to the fact that you could start to build dual DPS comps, but Ruan-Mei, very, very good for that. Then we got a new hypercarry support in Sparkle that helped one of the best hypercarries from the 1.x series of patches, Dan Heng, stay relevant, and was also very good with the 2.1 hypercarry, Acheron. Then with the release of powerful new damage dealers and supports in these patches, we got two main archetypes of teams that dominated the metagame: break teams and follow-up attack teams, each with a powerful limited Harmony unit serving as a cornerstone of the team comp. Or did we? Because break units have a second Harmony unit to talk about, of course, that's... well, it's you. While I think Ruan-Mei is still the best break support, Harmony MC created an entirely new game mechanic with Super Break. I just did this whole paragraph about how the meta teams are determined mostly by the most powerful supports available at the time, but break teams really are the most obvious example of this. Having two different Harmony units with break support baked into their kits, Super Break is just weird. It's a strange mechanic because, while obviously it's primarily meant to be used by the main break carries, it really allows you to turn any unit in the game into a break damage dealer if you really try hard enough. While giving a break effect buff and triggering Super Break is really all that the Harmony Trailblazer is known for as far as their kit's actual utility, the fact that that alone is enough to make them an incredible unit should kinda speak for itself. And the fact that you could turn goddamn Hook and Arlen into break damage dealers if you try hard enough is more proof than anything that Harmony is just the most broken class in the game. No pun intended there with broken and break and weakness break and super break and don't you go break in my heart, I don't know. The difference so far between Harmony and, for example, the damage dealing classes is that oftentimes the damage dealing classes find a niche or two that allow them to thrive in the meta, whether that's involving themselves in specific game modes and types of content, or different archetypes of teams. Hunt, for instance, built very heavily into the follow-up attack archetype. Topaz, Ratio, Hunt March 7th, Motse, and Fei Zhao are all follow-up attack units. But Harmony quite literally is everywhere. They fit into every team comp, every archetype, and every game mode. Everyone can benefit from buffers, and when a unit like Robin or Ruan-Mei, these units that have such broad universal buffs, they can just fit into just about any team and be better than almost every other unit in the game in that spot. However, the 2.x series of patches is wrapping up. And while we can still use these units in these team comps until they power creep the hell out of them and triple the HP of bosses and endgame content, we have to get ready to move on to a new type of team. If only we had a new Harmony unit that would give us a clear indication of what kind of team we'll see in the future. Am I right, fellas? Or am I right? Sunday is my enemy. We're not friends. This dude is my enemy. Dude tried to brainwash me, and that was enough, right? But then he also power crept Sparkle, and I will forgive him for neither of those equally bad offenses. But he's a broken support that's just really, really good. He's good in hypercarry teams and also will help to usher in the new wave of 7-based units we have coming our way. Catholic Man here has 100% action advance because, of course, everybody that's not named Sparkle gets to have that. And he's also, able to drag up a summon as opposed to just dragging up a character. So if you use him with Jing Yuan, then, you get to drag up Lightning Lord as well. He's also very friendly when it comes to skill point usage, because of course he is. And he's just got cracked general purpose offensive buffs as well that make him an incredible unit to pick up. Also, by the way, he's on banner right now, so you'd go pull him literally now if you wanted to. With 3.0 and forward introducing the new Remembrance path, which is based on summons, he likely will, like all premium supports before him, help to define the metagame going forward. Black Friday really completes the journey through Harmony up to this point and just goes on to further prove that this class is absurdly broken and is by far and away the most meta-defining class in the game. I mean, like I said in the Erudition video, Jing Yuan is good now. He's considered to be top tier in some game modes at the moment, solely because Sunday exists. If that isn't full-on proof that what I said about Harmony is true, then I don't know what is. A 1.0 unit suddenly becoming tier 0 with the release of a new support? I mean, come on. Harmony is broken. Picking up limited Harmony units is probably one of the smartest things you can do for any account, even though Sparkle, my dear poor Sparkle, is getting unfairly, taken behind the barn and shot by Sunday. She's still a very good unit that works well with a lot of teams, really any kind of hypercarry team and any team that wants to have a bunch of skill points just loaded on them all at once and likes crit damage. Hey, Sparkle's pretty good. Rowan May is still crazy good in Break and in just every other team ever, and Robin... Oh, well, Robin is literally probably going to be even more broken than ever if her ult can advance forward the memo sprites or servants or whatever these stupid things are called, I don't know anymore. But yeah, that about covers Harmony. It's a big deal as a class and defines the direction of the game more than any other single class can. Whether you like it or not. Speaking of liking, if you liked the video, then like the video. Not really reinventing the wheel on that one. Also comment and say something like, so-and-so is my favorite Harmony unit, you should have talked more about them. Yeah, say something like that. Also subscribe if you want, or if you don't want, just do it, I guess, I don't know, I'm still not pulling Sunday, just out of protest.